1942. Great Britain stands on the edge of defeat. Nazi Germany controls nearly all of Europe, and its war machine operates without pause. The heart of that machine beats in the Ruhr Valley. There, in the industrial heart of the Third Reich, half of all German military equipment is manufactured. Tanks, aircraft, ammunition, everything flows from the Ruhr Valley factories and travels to the front lines to kill Allied soldiers. British intelligence understands one critical fact. As long as these factories continue operating, the war cannot be won. They must be destroyed. But how? The factories are protected better than Berlin itself. Anti-aircraft batteries, fighter squadrons, bomb shelters, conventional bombing raids achieve nothing. But there is one weakness, one critical element without which all these factories would become nothing more than piles of useless metal: water. The Ruhr Valley factories run on hydroelectric power, and that power comes from three massive dams located in the mountains above the valley. The Möhne Dam, 40 meters tall, 34 meters thick, constructed from pure reinforced concrete, built by German engineers as an impregnable fortress. The Eder Dam, the second largest in Germany, holding back 202 million tons of water, and the Sorp Dam, an earthen structure more than 40 meters wide at its base. If these dams were destroyed, the resulting floods would devastate the valley below. Factories would drown, power stations would fail, roads and railways would wash away. Germany's war machine would grind to a halt. The problem? No one knows how to destroy them. Barnes Wallis was not a soldier. He was an engineer. Born in 1887 in Ripley, Derbyshire, he left school at 17 to become an apprentice at the Thames Engineering Works. By 1942, at 55 years old, Wallis had already established himself as one of Britain's most brilliant aeronautical engineers. He designed the revolutionary geodetic airframe structure used in the Vickers Wellington bomber. His innovations saved countless British lives during the early years of the war. But Wallis was not satisfied designing defensive weapons. He wanted to strike at the heart of Nazi Germany. In 1942, he began studying the problem of the Ruhr Valley dams. Military planners had already dismissed them as impossible targets. Conventional bombs simply bounced off the thick concrete walls or exploded harmlessly on the water's surface. Torpedoes. The Germans had installed anti-torpedo nets extending deep below the water. Every approach seemed futile. But Barnes Wallis did not think like a soldier. He thought like a mathematician. One evening in early 1942, Wallis sat at home watching his daughter play. She was throwing marbles into the bathtub, and something caught his attention. When thrown at the correct angle, the marbles did not simply sink into the water. They bounced. Wallis leaned forward. His daughter threw another marble. It skipped across the water's surface, once, twice, 3 times, before finally sinking. The engineer's mind began racing. What if a bomb could do the same thing? What if, instead of dropping straight down and exploding uselessly, a bomb could skip across the water like a stone thrown across a pond? It could jump over the anti-torpedo nets. It could reach the dam wall. It could sink down alongside the structure and detonate at the optimal depth where the pressure would do maximum damage to the weakest part of the dam. Wallis grabbed a notebook and began calculating. For the next 3 months, he became obsessed. His family watched him spend hours at the bathtub, throwing marbles and measuring angles. His colleagues at Vickers Aviation thought he had lost his mind. Military officials ignored his increasingly desperate letters. But Wallis knew he was onto something revolutionary. He calculated everything: the precise weight of the bomb, the exact speed of the aircraft, the optimal height for release, the necessary rate of backspin. Every variable mattered. A single miscalculation would mean death for the bomber crew and failure for the mission. By February 1943, Wallis had his answer. On paper, at least, it would work. Now he needed to convince the military. February 1943. Barnes Wallis walks into a conference room at the Air Ministry carrying an unusual prop, a bathtub filled with water. Around the table sit some of the highest-ranking officers in the Royal Air Force. They have agreed to this meeting reluctantly. Britain is losing the war. They do not have time for eccentric inventors with impossible ideas. Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal looks at his watch. "Mr. Wallis, we are extremely busy. You have 10 minutes to explain why we should not be elsewhere." Wallis places the bathtub on the conference table. The officers exchange glances. One lights a cigarette and leans back, clearly expecting to be entertained by a madman. "Gentlemen," Wallis begins, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "I know how to destroy the Ruhr Valley dams." Silence. Portal speaks. "Mr. Wallis, we have explored every option. The dams cannot be destroyed with conventional weapons. Their walls are simply too thick." "That's correct, sir," Wallis replies, "which is why we must use an unconventional weapon." He reaches into his pocket and produces a marble. He holds it up for everyone to see. This marble represents a bomb weighing approximately 4,000 kilograms. One of the officers snorts with barely concealed amusement. Wallis ignores him. He begins spinning the marble backward in his hand, then releases it toward the water. The marble hits the surface and bounces, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Every officer in the room leans forward. The marble skips across the entire length of the bathtub before finally sinking at the far end. No one speaks. Wallis breaks the silence. Conventional bombs fail because they explode on the surface or in the air. Torpedoes fail because the Germans have installed anti-torpedo nets. But a bouncing bomb, he emphasizes these words carefully, would skip over the nets, travel directly to the dam wall, sink alongside it, and detonate at a depth of approximately 9 meters, where the hydrostatic pressure would multiply the explosive force and crack the structure from within. Portal stubs out his cigarette. "Mr. Wallis, this is extraordinary, but can it be done at full scale?" "I believe so, sir, but I will need resources for testing and development." Another officer speaks up. "How much time would you require?" Wallis hesitates. He knows what he's about to say sounds insane. 3 months? 3 months? Impossible. But Portal raises his hand for silence. He stares at the bathtub, then at Wallis. "Mr. Wallis, if there's even a chance this could work, we must pursue it. The Ruhr Valley factories are critical to Germany's war effort. If we can eliminate them..." He trails off, the implications clear to everyone in the room. Portal makes his decision. "You have your approval. You will have access to whatever resources you need, but understand this. If your weapon fails, British aircrews will die. If it succeeds, it could change the course of this war." Wallis feels the weight of those words settle onto his shoulders. "I understand, sir." "Then get to work." On February 26, 1943, Operation Upkeep receives official authorization. Barnes Wallis has less than 3 months to turn his bathtub experiment into a weapon that will strike at the heart of Nazi Germany. The clock is ticking. Barnes Wallis stood on the frozen beach at Chesil in Dorset, watching his first full-scale test bomb shatter into pieces as it hit the water. December 1942. The marble in the bathtub had bounced perfectly. This metal sphere, dropped from a Wellington bomber at the correct speed and altitude, disintegrated on impact. This was not how it was supposed to work. The engineer pulled his coat tighter against the winter wind and made notes in his journal. Failure. He had convinced the Air Ministry that his bouncing bomb would work. He had 3 months to deliver a working weapon, and right now, his revolutionary idea was smashing itself to pieces in the cold waters of the English Channel. Wallis returned to Vickers Aviation Headquarters and redesigned the bomb. The metal sphere was too rigid, too prone to shattering. What if they encased it in wood? Wood would absorb the initial impact, protect the inner metal core, and still allow the bomb to bounce. His team worked through Christmas and into January constructing new prototypes. On January 23, 1943, they tried again. The wooden sphere dropped from the Wellington bomber. It hit the water, and it bounced once, twice, 3 times. The wooden casing shattered as designed, but the metal core inside continued spinning and bouncing across the surface. 13 bounces total. Wallis allowed himself a smile. Progress. But 13 bounces was too many. The bomb needed to travel a specific distance, no more, no less. Too many bounces and it would overshoot the dam. Too few and it would sink before reaching the wall. More calculations, more modifications, more tests. By early April 1943, 20 test bombs, both the large upkeep version for dams and the smaller highball version for ships, had been delivered to RAF Manston in Kent. On April 10th, Wallis flew from Farnborough to Manston in one of the specially modified Lancaster bombers. These aircraft, designated Type 464, had their bomb bay doors removed to accommodate the massive cylindrical bomb that now hung beneath the fuselage. The plan was to test the weapon over the waters near Reculver, where the shallow seabed would allow easy recovery of the bombs for examination after each drop. Wallis needed to see exactly how the weapon behaved, what damage it sustained, whether the calculations matched reality. The Lancaster climbed to altitude, then dove to build speed. The pilot leveled out at 80 feet above the water, traveling at 289 miles per hour. The bomb, rotating at 520 revolutions per minute, released. It struck the water. The wooden outer casing shattered instantly. The metal cylindrical core continued spinning, bouncing across the surface exactly as the mathematics predicted. Wallis watched through binoculars from the shore. "Excellent," he said quietly. The weapon worked, but there was a problem. The bomb was still spherical in shape, and the spheres were proving inconsistent in their behavior. Sometimes they bounced perfectly, sometimes they broke apart, sometimes they dove too deep, too quickly. Wallis made another crucial decision. The bomb would no longer be spherical. It would be cylindrical, a massive barrel-shaped weapon 60 inches long and 50 inches in diameter, weighing 4,196 kilograms when loaded with explosives. The cylindrical shape would be more stable, more predictable, easier to spin at the required speed. But cylindrical bombs had never been tested. No one knew if they would bounce at all. April 22, 1943. 3 weeks before the scheduled mission date, Vickers test pilot Richard Handyside climbed into a Wellington bomber carrying one of the new cylindrical prototypes. Wallis stood on the beach at Reculver, watching. The bomber approached at 185 feet altitude, traveling at 260 miles per hour. The cylinder released. It tumbled through the air, hit the water, and shattered completely. Wallis wrote one word in his notebook: failure. 3 weeks until the mission. The weapon did not work. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, Commander-in-Chief of RAF Bomber Command, had never believed in Wallis's bouncing bomb. Harris preferred conventional area bombing, dropping thousands of tons of explosives on German cities to destroy industrial capacity through sheer overwhelming force. He viewed Wallis's weapon as an unnecessary distraction, a waste of resources that could be better spent building more conventional bombers. If the tests continued to fail, Harris would cancel the entire operation. Wallis spent the next week obsessively recalculating every variable. The height had been wrong. 185 feet was too high. The cylinder needed less distance to tumble, more stability when it hit the water, and the speed, 260 miles per hour, was too slow. The cylinder needed more velocity to overcome the increased water resistance. New specifications. The bomb must be dropped from precisely 60 feet above the water, not 65 feet, not 55 feet, exactly 60 feet, at a ground speed of precisely 232 miles per hour. With backspin at precisely 500 revolutions per minute. Any deviation from these exact parameters and the weapon would fail. May 13, 1943. 3 days before the mission, the final test. A live upkeep bomb, fully loaded with explosives, would be dropped 5 miles out to sea from Broadstairs, Kent. If this test failed, there would be no time to fix it. The mission would be cancelled. Months of work, millions of pounds in funding, all wasted. The Lancaster bomber made its approach, 60 feet altitude, 232 miles per hour, 500 revolutions per minute backspin. The bomb released, it fell, hit the water, and bounced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. It traveled 800 yards across the surface of the sea before sinking. 30 seconds later, a massive explosion erupted underwater, sending a column of water 300 feet into the air. Wallis closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. It worked. After months of failures, calculations, redesigns, and endless tests, it finally worked. But now came the truly difficult part. Dropping a bomb under controlled test conditions over calm water was one thing. dropping it at night under enemy fire, with German anti-aircraft guns shooting at the aircraft, with the pilot trying to maintain exactly 60 feet of altitude while traveling at exactly 232 miles per hour. That was something else entirely. The weapon was ready. But were the men who would deliver it? On March 17, 1943, while Wallis had been struggling with his bomb tests, the Royal Air Force had issued orders to create a new squadron, Squadron 617, their mission to deliver Wallis's bouncing bombs to the Ruhr Valley dams, their chances of survival unknown. The man chosen to lead them, Wing Commander Guy Gibson, 24 years old, already a legend in Bomber Command. Gibson had flown 172 combat missions. He had survived tours of duty that killed most bomber crews within weeks. He was fearless, brilliant, and utterly dedicated to destroying Nazi Germany. He was also exhausted. Bomber Command had planned to give him a rest posting, a chance to recover from years of constant combat. Instead, they gave him the most dangerous mission of the war. Gibson's orders were simple: recruit the best bomber crews in the Royal Air Force, train them to fly at unprecedented low altitudes, and prepare them for a mission so secret that even he would not know the target until days before the attack. He had 2 months. Gibson began selecting his crews. He needed pilots who could fly a 4-engine Lancaster bomber at treetop level in complete darkness without instruments. He needed navigators who could plot courses across enemy territory with absolute precision. He needed bomb aimers with nerves of steel who could remain focused while anti-aircraft fire tore through the sky around them. And he needed men willing to die for a mission they knew nothing about. By early April, Gibson had assembled 133 men, British, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, American, all volunteers, all among the most experienced bomber crews in the entire Royal Air Force. They reported to RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire and began the most intense training program any of them had ever experienced: low-level flying. Night after night, the Lancasters screamed across the English countryside at altitudes below 100 feet. Farmers complained about the noise, livestock panicked, local officials demanded answers. Gibson ignored them all. His crews needed to fly lower than any bomber had ever flown in combat. 60 feet above water at night meant death if the pilot made even the smallest error. Every training flight risked crashing. Several crews came terrifyingly close, but Gibson pushed them harder. They flew over reservoirs, practicing approaches that mimicked the valleys where the German dams were located. They practiced flying in formation, practicing timing their approaches, practicing maintaining exact altitude and speed. They did not know why. Gibson would not tell them. All they knew was that the mission would be dangerous, perhaps suicidal, and that failure was not an option. On May 15th, the crews finally learned their target. Gibson gathered all 133 men in a briefing room at Scampton and unveiled a large map of Germany. 3 red circles marked the Möhne, Ader, and Sorp dams. The room fell silent. Every man understood immediately. This was not just dangerous. This was likely impossible. Barnes Wallis attended the briefing to explain his weapon. He stood before the assembled air crews and described the bouncing bomb, the precise requirements for release, the mathematical calculations that made it work. He told them about the months of testing, the failures, the final success. He looked at these young men, most barely in their 20s, and told them the truth. "Gentlemen, this weapon will either win us the war or it will kill you. Possibly both." The crews returned to their aircraft, final checks, final preparations. The bombs arrived at Scampton on May 13th, still warm from their final test explosion. Ground crews carefully loaded them into the modified Lancasters, ensuring the rotating mechanism functioned perfectly. May 16th, 1943. Evening, the crews gathered for final instructions. Takeoff would begin at 21:28 hours. 19 aircraft would attack in 3 waves. The first wave, 9 aircraft led by Gibson himself, would strike the Möhne Dam. If successful, they would proceed to the Ader Dam. The second wave, 5 aircraft, would attack the Sorp Dam. The third wave, 5 reserve aircraft, would attack any dam that remained intact or serve as backup if earlier waves were shot down. Radio silence would be maintained until the attack began. The Lancasters would fly at wave-top height across the North Sea, then navigate through the German countryside using moonlight and landmarks, avoiding known anti-aircraft positions. They would arrive at the dams shortly after midnight. Weather forecast: clear skies, full moon, perfect conditions for visual bombing. Also perfect conditions for German anti-aircraft gunners to see them coming. Gibson addressed his crews one final time. "You know what we are attempting tonight. You know the risks. Some of us will not return. But if we succeed, we will strike a blow against Nazi Germany that could shorten this war by months, perhaps years. We will save thousands of Allied lives, and we will prove that no target, no matter how well defended, is beyond the reach of the Royal Air Force. Good luck, gentlemen. I will see you over the target." The crews walked to their aircraft. Engines started. One by one, the massive Lancaster bombers taxied to the runway, each carrying a single 4,000-kilogram bomb spinning beneath its fuselage. At 21:28 precisely, the first aircraft thundered down the runway and lifted into the evening sky. 21:28, May 16, 1943. 19 Lancaster bombers lifted into the evening sky carrying 133 men and 19 bouncing bombs. Wing Commander Guy Gibson led them southeast across the North Sea at wave-top height, flying so low that spray hit the windscreens. The moon hung full and bright. Perfect visibility for bombing, perfect visibility for German gunners. 2300 hours, the Dutch coast. Lancaster AJB clipped a high-voltage power line and exploded in a fireball. 7 men dead. The formation continued. Lancaster AJK strayed over a German flak battery. Tracer rounds tore through the fuselage. The bomber exploded. 7 more dead. In the second wave, Lancaster AJE struck a power line and cartwheeled into the earth. Another 7 dead. 21 men lost before reaching the dams. 00:28 hours, May 17th. Gibson saw the Mona Dam, 40 meters of concrete stretching across the valley, 2 stone towers. Inside those towers, German anti-aircraft gunners waited. Gibson dove to 60 feet and accelerated to 232 miles per hour. The German guns opened fire. Red and green tracers streaked toward his Lancaster. He held his course. "Bomb gone!" The cylinder dropped, bounced 4 times, struck the dam and detonated. A column of water erupted 300 feet high. The dam held. Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood attacked next. German flak tore into his Lancaster. 1 engine caught fire, then another. The bomber was burning, but Hopgood continued. His bomb dropped late and overshot the target. Hopgood tried to gain altitude for his crew to bail out. 2 men jumped. Then the Lancaster exploded. 5 dead. Flight Lieutenant Harold Martin attacked. His bomb bounced, hit the dam, exploded. Still, the dam held. Flight Lieutenant David Maltby attacked. His bomb struck perfectly. The top of the dam began to crumble. Flight Lieutenant David Shannon attacked. A crack appeared in the wall. Gibson called Flight Lieutenant Leslie Knight. "You may attack now." Knight's Lancaster screamed across the reservoir at 60 feet. German flak filled the air. His bomb dropped, bounced 4 times, struck the dam wall perfectly. The center of the Mona Dam exploded. A section 150 meters wide collapsed. 200 million tons of water began pouring through the breach. The sound was like continuous thunder. Gibson radioed headquarters. "Nigger, nigger, nigger," the code word for success. But there was no time to celebrate. Gibson turned east toward the Eder Dam, 50 miles away. The Eder sat deep in a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills. The approach required diving between the hills, leveling at 60 feet, dropping the bomb, then pulling up sharply to avoid crashing. In darkness, 01:15 hours, Gibson arrived over the Eder. No anti-aircraft guns. The Germans thought the valley too difficult to attack. David Shannon dove into the valley. The approach angle was wrong. He aborted. He tried again, aborted again. 6 attempts before he finally dropped his bomb. It overshot. Flight Lieutenant Henry Maudslay tried next. He dropped his bomb, but it hit the top of the dam wall and detonated immediately. The explosion engulfed his Lancaster. The aircraft staggered into the sky trailing flames. German flak batteries shot him down minutes later. All 7 crew members died. 1 bomb remained. Flight Lieutenant Leslie Knight dove into the valley. Hills rushed past on either side, 60 feet altitude. Bomb gone. The cylinder dropped, bounced 3 times, struck the dam wall, sank. The Eder Dam exploded. The entire center section collapsed. 202 million tons of water thundered into the valley below. At 01:52 hours, Gibson radioed, "Dinghy, dinghy, dinghy." The code for success. 2 dams destroyed. The Sorp Dam was attacked but only damaged. The return flight brought more death. 2 more Lancasters were shot down over the Netherlands. At 04:06 hours, the last surviving Lancaster landed. 11 aircraft returned, 8 lost, 53 men dead, 3 captured. Guy Gibson climbed out of his Lancaster, hands shaking from exhaustion. He had destroyed 2 of the most heavily defended structures in Nazi Germany, but 53 men were dead. As dawn broke, reconnaissance aircraft photographed the damage. The valleys were underwater, villages had vanished, factories were submerged, the flooding extended 65 kilometers. But the photographs also showed bodies floating in the floodwater. Approximately 1,300 people had drowned. German civilians who had been sleeping, forced laborers from Poland and Russia, prisoners of war with no chance of escape. Barnes Wallis stood in the briefing room at RAF Scampton on the morning of May 17, 1943, waiting for the crews to return. He had addressed 19 crews the previous afternoon. Now he counted the aircraft as they landed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The engine stopped. Silence. 56 faces were gone. 53 men dead. 3 captured. All but 3 would never come home. Wallis felt his legs weaken. He had spent months calculating trajectories, angles, velocities, explosive yields. He had tested his weapon dozens of times. He had promised the Air Ministry it would work. And it had worked. The dams were destroyed. The Ruhr Valley was flooded. Germany's war production would be crippled for months. But 53 men were dead because of his mathematics. Gibson approached him, still wearing his flight suit, his face gray with exhaustion. "Mr. Wallis, we did it. Both dams breached. Your weapon performed perfectly." Wallis tried to speak, but could not. He shook Gibson's hand, then turned and walked away. He did not trust himself to remain composed. 36 hours later, Wallis's wife wrote to a friend describing what happened when he finally came home. "Poor Barnes didn't get home till 5 to 12 last night, only 3 hours sleep Saturday, didn't take his clothes off Sunday, and was awake till 2:30 this morning telling me all about it. And then, poor dear darling Barnes, he woke at 6 feeling absolutely awful. He'd killed so many people." The genius who had created the bouncing bomb spent the rest of his life remembering the names of those 53 airmen. He never forgot a single one. Guy Gibson received the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor in the British Empire, for leading Operation Chastise. At 24 years old, he became the most decorated serviceman in the Royal Air Force. He had completed over 170 combat missions. He had survived battles that killed thousands of other airmen. He was a national hero, but he could not stop fighting. In September 1944, Gibson volunteered for one more mission, flying as a master bomber over the Netherlands. His Mosquito aircraft was hit by German anti-aircraft fire and crashed near the town of Steinbergen. Guy Gibson died instantly. He was 26 years old. He never married. He never had children. He never lived to see the war end. The man who led the greatest raid in RAF history is buried in a small cemetery in Holland, thousands of miles from the dams he destroyed. Of the 133 men who flew on Operation Chastise, 34 would be dead before the war ended. The survivors carried the memories of that night for the rest of their lives. They remembered friends who never came home. They remembered the sound of anti-aircraft fire. They remembered the dams breaking. They remembered the water. But what about the victims in the valley below? Approximately 1,300 people drowned when the dams broke. German civilians, Polish forced laborers, Russian prisoners of war, Ukrainian women imprisoned in work camps. They had no warning, no chance to escape. The water came at night, traveling at 30 kilometers per hour, sweeping away entire villages in minutes. Years later, historians would debate whether Operation Chastise was worth the cost. The dams were repaired within months. German war production recovered. The strategic impact, some argued, was minimal. Others countered that the raid proved precision bombing could work. that it demonstrated Allied capability to strike any target in Germany, that it provided a massive boost to British morale at a time when the war seemed unwinnable. Both sides are probably correct. Barnes Wallis continued inventing weapons after the war ended. He designed earthquake bombs that could penetrate deep underground and destroy hardened bunkers. He pioneered swing-wing aircraft design. He revolutionized aeronautical engineering. He lived to be 92 years old, dying peacefully in 1979. But he never designed another bouncing bomb. The weapon that made him famous was never used again after that single night in May 1943. It had achieved its purpose, and it had killed too many people, both friend and enemy. Operation Chastise succeeded beyond all expectations. 2 massive dams destroyed, Germany's industrial heartland flooded, a raid that military planners had considered impossible, executed perfectly. But it came at a price that haunted everyone involved for the rest of their lives. 53 British airmen dead, 1,300 civilians drowned, and one brilliant engineer who woke at dawn feeling absolutely awful because his mathematics had killed so many people. Sometimes genius comes with a cost that cannot be calculated. Sometimes the most successful mission is also the most painful. And sometimes the men who change history carry that weight forever. The bouncing bomb worked exactly as designed. The dams broke exactly as predicted. The mission succeeded exactly as planned. But Barnes Wallis never stopped counting the dead.